Paris, 1943. The Seine moved quietly under the bridges, as if trying not to draw attention to itself. Even the pigeons seemed to land more softly that year, wings folding with a kind of careful sorrow. In the narrow streets behind the shuttered bakeries and the requisitioned schools, children carried themselves with an unusual stillness. Their steps were measured, their laughter, once a bright thread woven through these neighborhoods, had thinned into an almost invisible strand. They had been taught not to scream, not in surprise, not in fear, not even in those small childhood moments when a scraped knee or a splinter might demand the right to cry out. A scream carried too far. It traveled through walls, across courtyards, under doors that were better kept closed. The adults tried to teach this gently, though there was no gentle way to say it. A hush here, a warning glance there, a hand pressed softly over a small mouth before the sound could escape. Some children understood immediately, their eyes widening with an unspoken knowledge. Others struggled, little ones who forgot themselves, who let out a short cry when they slipped on the cobblestones or dropped a pail of milk. And then they disappeared. No one spoke of where they went. Parents kept their faces turned downward, their hands tightening around the remaining children. Neighbors traded glances heavy with guilt and helplessness. The silence grew thicker, spreading like the winter fog along the banks of the river. What becomes of a city where even its children must learn to swallow their own voices? My name is Margot Delon, and I lived on Rue des Trois Frères, in the northern part of Montmartre. I was a school teacher before the occupation rearranged everything: classroom schedules, food rations, the weight of our hearts. The child I write about now was named Lucien. He was 8 years old and lived 2 doors down from me. His mother, Elise, kept their windows open just long enough each morning to shake out the dust and let in a sliver of light. Lucien had a habit of humming to himself, little melodies he picked up from street musicians before they were chased away. He was a gentle presence, the sort of boy who collected bottle caps and marbles and lined them neatly on the windowsill, as though the world outside needed a bit of order. I write this letter because I remember the last sound he made, and everything that followed, the moment it slipped from him. And I cannot bear the thought that his small name might disappear too. Lucien first came into my classroom in the spring of 1941, when Paris was already practicing its new quiet. Even then, the children sat differently than they had in the years before, their backs straight, their eyes shifting toward the door whenever footsteps echoed in the corridor. The chalk dust hung heavier in the warm air, as though it too understood that it should not drift too freely. But Lucien's gaze was the exception. He paid attention the way a child should, with wonder, not worry. He traced the edges of his notebooks as though they were maps. He copied my handwriting with exaggerated loops, sometimes adding flourishes of his own. During lessons, he often paused his pencil mid-air, just long enough to hum a single note before continuing. I should have corrected him. Humming was discouraged, like everything that rose above a whisper. But the sound was so soft, so quick, it felt like a bird brushing past a windowsill. A tiny rebellion disguised as innocence. I let it pass. One afternoon, after the rest of the students had gone home, Lucien lingered behind. He approached my desk with something cupped in his palms. When he opened his hands, I found a marble the color of river glass. "For you," he said, "so you don't forget things." It was an odd gift from a child, but the sincerity in his voice made it impossibly heavy. Life on our street had begun to narrow by then. The market stalls closed earlier each week. Families kept their shutters drawn, even in daylight. The wider city, the opera house, the cafes, the grand boulevards, felt unreachable, like a memory someone else had lived. So Rue des Trois Frères became its own small world, and within it, the children carved out their own fragile routines. They met in the stairwells to trade treasures rescued from shuttered shops. They drew chalk lines on the cobblestones for games they barely dared to play. And they whispered, always whispered, stories about those who had vanished. We adults tried not to listen, not because we didn't care, but because the truth was too large and too sharp to hold. When a child disappeared, a kind of hush fell over the street. Doors were closed a little faster. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Mothers walked their children by the hand, their pace quickening as if distance alone could protect them. Lucien, though, somehow held onto a softness that hadn't yet been taken from him. He skipped the final step on his building staircase every time, insisting it made a hollow sound, like a drum, though he was careful not to stomp too loudly. In those moments, I saw the boy he might have been in another life, one where sound wasn't something dangerous. There was a day that remains especially vivid in my memory. A delivery cart rattled down the street, and its wooden wheel caught on a loose stone. The crack was sudden, sharp enough to startle anyone. Lucien had been walking just ahead of me, carrying a loaf of bread wrapped in brown paper. The noise made him jump, and for the smallest heartbeat, I saw a spark of instinct rise in him, the kind of sound a child makes without thinking. He caught himself, pressed his lips together, looked up at me with eyes full of apology, though he had done nothing wrong. That moment stays with me, the sight of a child learning to silence his joy, his fear, everything that made him human. And I remember wondering, how long could such restraint hold? In the summer of 1943, the air felt different, heavy. The heat pressed itself into the walls, the stair rails, the narrow balconies that overlooked our street. Even the laundry hung from windows seemed reluctant to sway in the breeze, as though movement itself could draw unwanted eyes. Lucien, now 8 and newly tall for his age, seemed to stretch each day into something uncertain. His shoes were tight, his sleeves a bit too short. Elise did what she could, patching and repatching his shirts until her needle broke. She kept her face composed, but on the evenings when she returned from standing in ration lines, her hands trembled slightly as she ladled out thin soup. One such evening, I sat with them in their kitchen. The walls were faded yellow, peeling in shy curls. Lucien had arranged his marbles in a careful circle on the table, each one catching the lamplight in a different shade. "They're planets," he whispered, "and this one," he pointed to a small cloudy blue sphere, "is ours." He said it with such conviction that for a moment I almost believed his tiny universe could hold us safe. Children were quieter that summer. The older ones, especially, walked with an awareness they should never have needed, shoulders pulled in, steps measured. They had learned the rhythm of silence the way others learn a language, but the younger children struggled. They forgot. And forgetting had become dangerous. Rumors drifted through the stairwells and courtyards like stray smoke. A child crying outside a bakery, another startled by a barking dog, a third who had run after a ball and called out too loudly. Each story traveled from balcony to balcony, lowered voices stitching them together until they formed something ominous and undeniable. We adults tried to shield the remaining children from these stories, but fear is a creature that finds its own way. I saw it settle in Elise's posture, tightening her shoulders whenever Lucien ventured more than a few feet from her side. And yet, Lucien's humming persisted, barely audible, a thread of sound no thicker than breath, but it was there, a remnant of a self the world was trying to erase. Sometimes I'd hear it drifting through their window as I passed by, a small tune floating out into the layered quiet of the street. One night, I returned home to find Lucien sitting alone on the front steps. His elbows rested on his knees, a marble turning slowly between his thumb and forefinger. When he looked up, his eyes reflected the lamplight like two small coins. "Do you think," he asked softly, "that if someone hears me, they'll take me too?" My breath caught. It was a question no child should ever have to ask. I sat beside him. The stone step was warm, still holding the heat of the day. "Your voice," I said gently, "is not something you should have to hide." Even as I spoke the words, I knew how fragile they were. Lucien turned the marble again, watching the light bend inside it. "Mama says I must be careful, but sometimes I forget." He looked at me then, not with fear, but with a quiet longing to understand a world that made no sense. A distant siren wailed somewhere across the city, rising and falling like a prolonged sigh. Lucien didn't flinch. He simply lowered his gaze to the marble in his palm, as though searching its small universe for an answer. I wanted to tell him that forgetting was human, that mistakes were woven into childhood like scraped knees and lost buttons. But those truths had been pushed aside by the harsher rules of the times, so instead I placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "You're doing the best you can," I whispered, and the weight of that simple truth in those days felt heavier than anything else. The day everything changed feels, in my memory, both sharply defined and strangely quiet, as though the world itself held its breath. It was late September. The sky hung low over Paris, pale and restless, carrying the smell of rain that never quite fell. The street was unusually empty. Even the grocer's wooden crates, usually stacked haphazardly by the door, had been pulled inside. I was returning from the schoolhouse, my satchel filled with graded papers, the edges smudged with graphite from small, careful hands. As I turned the corner onto Rue des Trois Frères, I saw Lucien near the mouth of the alley, crouched beside a stray cat. He was stroking the animal's back, whispering something I couldn't hear. The cat purred in response, its tail curling with an affection it rarely granted anyone. I smiled to myself. Even in these times, Lucien had a way of drawing gentleness toward him. Then the metal clatter came, the unmistakable scrape of boots at the far end of the street. It wasn't loud, not really, just enough to send the cat darting into the shadows. Lucien stood quickly, brushing dust from his knees. In the motion, one of his marbles slipped from his pocket, bouncing once on the cobblestones before rolling toward the gutter. Instinctively, the boy let out a small sound, barely louder than a gasp, a startled exhale of surprise, but it was a sound, a human sound, and in that neighborhood, under those watchful eyes, it carried just far enough. I felt the air change, an almost invisible shift, like the tightening of an unseen string. Lucien froze. His face went pale in the way only a child's can, drained of color as though fear had brushed him with its cold hand. I moved toward him, trying to appear calm, casual even. "Lucien," I called softly, "come along now." I hoped, prayed, that it might be enough. But the boots were closer now, not running, not hurried, just approaching with the steady, inevitable rhythm that had haunted our streets for years. Lucien looked at me. His eyes shimmered with something I will never forget. Not terror exactly, but the dawning understanding that a boundary had been crossed, a rule broken, a sound made. He whispered my name, not loudly, not desperately, just seeking. A shadow fell across the street. An officer turned the corner. I stepped in front of Lucien without thinking, positioning myself between him and that cold, assessing gaze. The officer paused. His gloved hands rested lightly behind his back. His eyes swept the narrow street, landing briefly on the marble still resting near the curb. "Is everything all right here?" he asked. The question, like so many in those days, was not a question at all. "Yes," I answered, keeping my voice steady. "Just a child and his schoolteacher." Lucien pressed into my side, slipping his small hand into mine, his fingers trembling. For a moment, a single, suspended moment, I thought the officer might continue down the street, that perhaps the wind, the angle of the buildings, the quiet around us had softened the sound enough to spare him. But then his gaze settled on Lucien with the sharpness of someone who already knew the answer. He stepped forward. Elise's window creaked open above us. A frail sound, almost like a prayer being torn in half. Lucien's hand tightened around mine. I could feel his heartbeat through his palm, rapid and fragile. The officer reached out, and that was the last day I saw Lucien on our street. The silence that followed his absence was colder than any winter that came before or after. In the weeks that followed, Rue des Trois Frères felt hollowed out, as though an essential pillar of its small world had been quietly removed. The children walked more slowly, their steps softer than ever. The marbles Lucien used to trade were found tucked into corners, hidden in stairwells, abandoned near the fountain, as though the street itself was giving back what little of him it still held. Elise's window, once cracked open each morning to let in the day's first light, remained shut. The curtains stayed drawn, filtering the sun into a muted wash of grey. Sometimes I knocked, just lightly, hoping for a sound of movement on the other side. Most often, there was nothing. Loss had settled in that apartment like a second tenant, quiet and heavy. The neighbors tried to help in small ways, a loaf of bread left by the door, a jar of broth, a folded shawl. But grief is a difficult guest to comfort. It refuses most offerings. It lingers in the corners that food and fabric cannot reach. As for me, I carried on teaching, though the classroom felt unbearably large. During handwriting lessons, I would pause when I reached the line where Lucien once sat, expecting to see his small fingers pinching the pencil, his brow furrowed in concentration. I would almost hear his soft humming before remembering that the space he occupied was now only air and memory. One cold morning in December, as I walked to school, I noticed something on the stone step outside their building. A single marble, the cloudy blue one he once told me was our planet. Someone had placed it there deliberately, centering it as though to mark a place of remembrance. I picked it up. The surface was cold but smooth, the faint swirl inside still catching the faint grey light. I slipped it into my coat pocket and felt its small weight settle against me. A reminder, fragile but real, that not everything of him had vanished. That evening, I wrote a letter. Not to anyone who could receive it, not to Elise, who had retreated deep into her silence, nor to any authority who would understand its purpose. I wrote it for him. A letter filled with the things I wished I could have said when his hand was still in mine. That his voice mattered, that his softness was not a flaw, that the world had been wrong to demand such silence from him. When I folded the paper, I placed the marble on top of it, feeling the two small offerings become something like a promise, that his name, Lucien, would not be lost, that the echo of his small voice would not fade entirely into the noise of history. Winter deepened. Snow came late, dusting the rooftops in a thin, uneven layer. One morning, as I walked down the hill toward the school, I noticed children pressing footprints into the fresh snow. Their voices were as quiet as ever, but here and there a soft laugh escaped, quickly muffled but present, and I realized something. Even in silence, children find ways to leave traces of themselves. A footprint, a chalk line, a marble forgotten by a door. They survive in the small details that the world overlooks. Lucien, in the end, remained in those details, in the way I listened more carefully, in the way the children tiptoed yet still found moments of play, in the careful hush that now held a thread of remembrance rather than fear. He was gone, but not erased. And on some days, when the wind was just right, I could swear I heard the faintest hint of a child humming, soft as a breath, light as a memory, carrying itself gently down Rue des Trois Frères. Dear reader, if you have followed this far, then you too have carried a little of Lucien with you. His voice was small, but it was real, and now it has reached another pair of listening ears. Perhaps that is how the lost remain, through the quiet tending of those willing to remember. Thank you for holding this story with care. If it moved you, I invite you, softly, gently, to like and subscribe, so these small names and quiet voices may continue to be heard.